Hello and welcome to this screencast on how to plan your TP9, which is a 60-minute lesson. Now, this is the same handout that you have been given and that you have access to through your online shared folder. And basically what we're going to do is I'm just going to talk you through it once again, just as discussed in person. Now, your 60-minute lesson, what you have to do basically is to ensure that you have a balance between receptive skills and language. Now, up until now, you have been teaching 40-minute lessons which focus basically on receptive skills, basically reading or listening, and or language lessons which focus on grammar, vocabulary, or functions. Now, for your last TP, teaching practice number 9, because you have 60 minutes, you're required to teach a combo lesson where you show us that all the work you've done throughout the course basically has translated into your understanding of how to put together a longer lesson which combines both receptive skills work and language work. Now, we suggest that you adopt a text-based presentation for this 1-hour lesson, because that way you can start with the receptive skills work, because it's always going to be based on a text. So you're going to have either a reading or a listening text, and by doing it this way, you can do all the skills work, do all the skimming and or listening for gist, the scanning and or listening for detail, and then have a short extension stage, exploiting the students' ability to deal with the text and therefore developing their skills before you go on to analyzing the language which is embedded in the text. This is probably the best approach. Obviously, you can do it whichever way you want. You may start with the language first and then look at receptive skills. But if you remember, we've been talking about guided discovery and also as a framework for your lessons. And so this format that you have here lends itself very well to basically exploiting the text, ensuring that you have a clear context throughout, that you have worked on their receptive skills before you actually use that same text to then focus their attention on the language which is embedded in the reading or listening text. So we strongly suggest that you adopt this framework. Now, basically, as I was saying before, you are very familiar now with a guided discovery lesson framework and a PPP framework. And so if we look at the different stages for a guided discovery approach or a text-based approach, we know that there are 3 similarities with the receptive skills framework, because basically we always start with a leading and warmer, then we have a pre-reading or pre-listening stage where we usually deal with either pre-teaching vocabulary or making predictions, which they will use in the gist stage, which is the skimming here. And then in a text-based presentation, we jump from the skimming, we jump straight into then the guided discovery and the control practice and freer practice and feedback, because in a text-based presentation or in a guided discovery framework, then obviously we want to establish a very clear context. We want to establish a very, very clear context which the students will be able to look back and think about when we deal with the language. Now, for this lesson, what we're going to do is basically we're just going to exploit what we know already. And by that, what I mean is basically that we're going to start with a leading and warmer. You're familiar with that, so you're going to use visuals, and audio, video, anything that will help establish a clear context in line with the text below. And you don't really have to worry much about this because that text will have been given to you, page X, Y, and Z, so you already will have a context there. Then you need to do a pre-reading or pre-listening stage, and here you have, remember we said you have two options where you can either do it via a traditional approach and do the PTV, so the pre-teach the vocabulary that you think they're going to need to be able to answer the gist and comprehension tasks, so any blocking vocabulary, or you can make predictions which they can confirm after when they do the gist reading or gist listening. Then we move on to the skimming, or in that would be reading or listening for gist. And you can either give them a gist question at the beginning or confirm the predictions that they made up here. So either or. This is very important that you don't have both, because then that means that your timing here would go up and you would need twice as long. So that's very important that you basically don't have both, but that you have one or the other. We can move on then and then look at scanning, and that's when they're going to be reading for or listening for detail. And then here again you have two options, and those options are either reading or listening for specific information, answering factual information questions, usually who, where, when, and what, and or depending on how much time you have, you could have both, or you could have just one. And or reading and listening for detailed information, more open-ended questions that require more detail. Very important here is for you to decide whether you're going to have one or two or both. Okay, so that's important for you to take to keep in mind. Now, looking at the extension, we've been saying that the extension is where the stage where students react to the text and they ask questions related to the topic of the content. So that make sure that that doesn't take very long, because you need to be thinking of your whole lesson as a 60-minute lesson. Now, moving on, you've done that. Now we start looking at the guided discovery, and as we said before, it is the heart of the lesson. So you're aiming at least 10 minutes there. We're looking at language, and remember, we've been saying that a PPP, presentation practice production approach, is fine, but it lends itself very easily to high teacher talking time. And if you have a problem with that, it's probably better if you adopt a guided discovery approach. And so basically a worksheet, in this stage, you would give them a worksheet containing the questions which you would otherwise ask orally the students in a teacher-led presentation. You would be eliciting, yes, and that's positive. But if you have problems with TTT and just talking too much, then you would probably be doing so if you ask them the questions orally. Also, if you did that, then you would be interacting with the students one at a time, while with a guided discovery, your worksheet means that these questions, the students would be working on them either individually or in pairs, and therefore you would have more people working, using their brain, figuring out the questions and looking back at the text here through your questions and analyzing it rather than one-on-one through your questioning. Now, once you've done that, and your worksheet deals with meaning, form, pronunciation, and usage possibly, then you obviously need to make sure that you're monitoring and that you give them feedback and clarification of any potential problems. Now, having done that, then we're looking at control practice for accuracy. We want to ensure that they're doing the right thing. And examples of controlled practice exercises are typically found in workbooks. Then we move on to fluency. So that's where they're going to be freer practice for fluency. So it's less restricted practice of the target language that they analyzed up here. Okay? And which is embedded in the reading or listening text up here. So you cannot be asking them to do things or talk about things that are not related to the embedded text, the embedded language that you analyzed. Now, you finish that with some feedback on which focuses on the language use in the freer stage. Okay, well, I hope that is clear, and that gives you helps you prepare and plan your TP9. In any case, we'll be looking at it briefly in assisted lesson planning. Good luck.